you for more on this controversial diabetes drug and what led the FDA to make its decision today. We're going to be hearing directly from the FDA commissioner. That's Dr. Peggy Hamburg, who is at the Health and Human Services headquarters in Washington. Also joining us for the interview is Bloomberg's managing editor for global health, Michael Waldholz. Thank you so much. Dr. Hamburg, I first want to ask you, when was the last time you actually came to a decision with the FDA that was not the exact decision that was made with European regulators, but because we have European regulators pulling the drug off, and yet it will still be accessible in much more limited capacity to people in America?
Well, it is unusual for us to work in a coordinated way in terms of the level of back and forth discussion, observation of each other's advisory committees, and simultaneous announcement of our regulatory decisions. As you note, our regulatory decision in this case are different. The EMA, the European Medicines Agency, is not actually revoking the approval of Avandia, but it is suspending the use. And they will be continuing to evaluate data and looking at risk-benefit, and they might take further actions as indicated. We have looked at the data, come to similar conclusions about the concern of increased cardiovascular risk, but rather than suspending its use altogether or pulling it off the market, we have restricted its use so that it will be used under very limited conditions where doctors are fully aware of the risk concerns, communicate that with their patients. The patients have to attest that they understand the risk. The doctors have to document that in the charts. But for a limited number of patients for whom they have been able to achieve good glycemic control, who are aware of the risks and want to continue on the drug, or for patients, new patients that have failed all other treatment strategies and are not candidates for the other drug in the class, Actos, they can take Avandia as well.
Well, I want to ask you about Actos as well, because I know there's been research being done. There are two studies that have been being done, TIDE and then also RECORD. What are the status of those two research programs that are underway?
Well, with respect to the TIDE study, which was a head-to-head comparison study of Avandia and Actos, we have asked GlaxoSmithKline to stop that trial because of the concerns of increased cardiovascular risk with Avandia. With respect to the RECORD study, in the course of the FDA review of that study and the data from it, there were concerns raised about both the structure of the trial and how some of the data was analyzed. And so we are asking the company to convene a group of independent scientists to reevaluate that data, going back to the primary patient data, so that we can get a better sense of the validity of the findings from that study. And again, as we learn more, we will continue to look at the risks and benefits of this drug for patients.
Dr. Hamburg, this is Mike Waldholz. I'm wondering what you can tell American consumers. This was such an important drug. The study came out 3 years ago that it had high cardiovascular risk. The research came out from an independent physician, not from the FDA. It took 3 years to come to this decision. What can you tell consumers and that are listening, and investors, whoever else, about what the FDA is trying to do to avoid this kind of significant risk for a highly used drug, why it took so long to find this, to identify this risk?
Well, I think as the concerns about cardiovascular risk were raised, every effort was made to pursue those findings and examine them to make sure that those findings were accurate. We undertook a meta-analysis similar to the study that first identified the risk for cardiovascular
But I think one of the questions is, what is the FDA doing going forward so that something like this doesn't happen again? I mean, there are a lot of drugs out there that appear to only, these kinds of adverse effects only get seen after the drug is on the market.
Well, it's not surprising that we see safety concerns emerge once the drug is in the market, because when you're testing a drug before approval, it's on limited number of patients who have been selected for the studies so that you can ask very specific questions. Once the drug goes from being tested in a very limited number of patients to being used by millions of patients, and patients that have other underlying diseases or on other medications, et cetera, it is not surprising at all that you start to see safety concerns emerge.
Dr. Hamburg,
that will have to be the final word. I apologize for having to cut you off.